A frequent problem in Excel and a major cleanup issue is the presence of unwanted spaces. As you look at the data in column A, you can surely see some leading spaces in some cases, and notice that there are multiple spaces between the last and first name, and there might even be some trailing spaces, although they're not obvious. And many times these issues come to the forefront when you sort the data. If you've got a huge list and issues like these are occurring 50 rows away, you don't always see them ahead of time. But if we sort this list quickly, I'll click the AZ button on the Data tab up above. We see what's happening. Those with leading spaces occur at the top of the list. Looks like there are a few spaces in front of the W and Kathy Watanuki there, and also Harvey here and Eric Hendricks and so on. And the multiple spaces just don't look good. How do we clean these up? The function called trim, equal trim. Now, typically you'll set up an extra column if you don't have it already to handle this. Trim, there we go. That looks good. We'll double click. And as you look back and forth, first of all, you can't tell about the trailing spaces unless you go to each cell individually, but they've been taken care of too, as we'll see. But the key idea is that the leading spaces are no longer there. If we were to sort the list eventually now, Kathy Watanuki would be near the bottom, of course. But look what happens to multiple consecutive inner spaces, like the multiple spaces between Hendricks and Eric. They get reduced to 1. Also between Baker and Mark and Catalano and Robert, as we see over here. So this takes care of the spaces. The other issue that we sometimes run into is when we're trying to match data. You can see clearly Fitzgerald there has some leading spaces. But let's imagine we're trying to match up these names. Maybe we're on a different worksheet. We're trying to see if these names exist in column A. Equal match. Left parenthesis, there's the name we're trying to match, comma, we'll click column A, comma, and in the match function, 0 means exact match. We're trying to see if there's an exact match. There we are. Not applicable. So what might we do? Looks like Jackie Fitzgerald is okay over there in column A. Don't see any leading spaces, but we do have leading spaces to the right. So we could use the trim function to say, let's look at the trim version of D2. So trim, remember, removes leading spaces, trailing spaces, and it reduces multiple consecutive inner spaces to a single space. Now we're going to take the trim version of cell D2 and see if there's a match. And there is. It's in the 10th position. Since we use the row reference, of course, that means in the 10th row. Now, let's just copy this downward for Don Nichols. See what's going on there. Looks like there's a couple of spaces between the comma and Don. There is, so let's clean that up. Get rid of that. Maybe that's all it takes. And by the way, when you're editing, if you clicked on the right edge of the cell, if there is a trailing space, you would see it. We don't in this case, so that entry looks good. We click enter, and this function still isn't working properly. So what's going on here? We've got trim in place here. There was nothing wrong with Don Nichols anyway, so what's happening here? Let's go check column A, down on Don Nichols here. Now I'm going to double click on the right edge of the cell, somewhere beyond the name. And immediately you see that the blinking cursor is a space after Don. When we don't know that, is there a way to work around this? It's not working here with the trim function, but one thing you could do, it does require an array formula. We could say, let's compare our trimmed version of Don Nichols here with the trim version of all the data in column A. And because this is now an array, we're trying to look in the entire column at once, we'll press Control-Shift-Enter. And we do find Don Nichols in row 15. So that's probably a little unusual to do that, but that's another way to help match up data. Now, getting back to the data in column A and the fact that column B does show our data in the way we would want. Eventually, why not keep this data and throw away the data in column B? So ideally what we want to do now, and there's a very quick way to do this, and you may have seen this in other movies, we will simply drag this data using the right mouse button on top of the old data. And as we drag this, because we're using the right mouse button, we will get a shortcut menu. But we don't see it until we let go of the right mouse button. And there it is. Copy here as values only. So then the data in column A will be clean. The formulas in column B, we don't need anymore. The data in column A looks just great, and we've got our data back in place. So all this happened because of the use of the trim function to get rid of those unnecessary spaces. Remember, it's the leading spaces that cause the biggest problems, not only in sorting, but also in matching. But it's also those trailing spaces that give us issues and concerns when we're matching data. So there's no question the trim function is a great help in cleaning up data.